All right, everyone. First lecture of the semester here. There's a lot to go over, but I think that this is a really good place for us to start because oftentimes I get students who get a little bit confused about which tool you should use for which assignments, and sometimes you will come to me and I have a lot of students that are like, why can't I just use Figma to do everything? Most of you guys are going to be UX design students. Some of you guys may end up going into print, but I want to sort of clear the air about that because there is a right tool for each job. And it's really important that you are, in fact, using the right tool for the job. So jumping in, here's a little bit of what we're going to be covering in today's lecture. I'm going to try to keep today's a little bit light. The next one's going to be a little bit heavy, so try to balance that out for you. First, we're going to start by going over vector versus raster imaging. We'll give a little, well, actually, it's quite a large overview of the Adobe suite, as well as talk about Figma and its role in design, especially as it being a slightly newer software, certainly newer than most of the Adobe softwares that we are going to work with. I'll also talk about some other tools that you're going to maybe encounter. Some of you might end up using them, although maybe not all of you. So just talk about some other tools that either you might use or that are going to be used alongside of you, or that are sort of adjacent to the tools that we are going to be used, sort of like other options that you have. I'm going to talk about the tools that we are specifically going to be using in class and when you ought to use them, sort of tying us back to the title of the lecture. And then I'm going to go over some software setup and installation. So to get us started, let's talk about vector versus raster imaging. And when there's really two main types of digital image files. There is raster and there is vector. We're going to break both of these down. Digital photos and detailed graphics both come in raster form. Some popular types of raster files include JPEGs, PNGs, and GIF images. Yes, I pronounce it GIF, not GIF, because that's how I like it. And it stands for Graphics Interchange Format, not Graphics. So judge me. I don't care. However, because a raster file, because it has pixels, and that pixel number is fixed, meaning that you can't create more pixels from nowhere, raster images can sometimes, depending on their sort of origin size or how much they've been reduced, those raster images can become a bit distorted, blurry, or even pixelated when resized to fill, per se, a larger or smaller space. We might even see some of that in this presentation. I've used some GIFs later on in the presentation, so you might see some of that come up just sort of as an example. Also known as bitmap, raster files work typically best when you need to store and display high quality photographs. Most photos come in the raster file format, no matter if they're going to be used for print or digital. In fact, all images come in raster formats. With softwares like Adobe Photoshop, you can then edit those, in theory, individual pixels within a raster file to change the appearance of that photograph. However, each raster image is limited to its individual dimensions, and really that is based on the number of pixels, which ultimately affects that image's size and resolution. While, especially with today's softwares, you can, or you might technically be able to increase the size of an image with not enough pixels, that will still inherently cause pixelation, which isn't typically a desirable look in the type of high quality design work that companies typically seek from their design teams. That's why illustrations or logos that need to be used across a variety of sizes often come in what is called a vector format. Some of the main advantages of raster files include sort of the attention to detail that you can get from them. When displayed in the right dimensions, raster files can show off all the intricate details and color shading and really anything. It's almost realistic to life in a sense. And those raster images are able to reproduce that high resolution that we want in things like photos. It can just show off all that intricate detail that we want. The more pixels that are in a file or that a file contains, the stronger the image quality, oftentimes the larger the image file size would be. But you also get precise editing. You will really have the power to individually alter each pixel, although we don't normally do it that way, when you are conducting edits on a raster file. Again, wouldn't necessarily do it pixel by pixel. You're usually applying it across the scale of pixels that are in an image. But really, this lets you enhance and sort of tailor the image to your own needs or the needs of the company that you're ultimately working for. And then additionally, they're also extremely widely compatible. Raster files can open in a wide range of programs and web browsers, which make them really easy to view and to edit them and share your images. You can even take a raster image on your phone, edit it on your phone, and send it to print on your phone. Like that's pretty powerful for you to be able to do on your phone. So all of those are just some advantages of raster images. Now, on the other hand, some disadvantages that you can end up with are that you do, by nature, because it is pixel-based, have a limit to the resolution that you can produce. Unlike vector images, raster files don't maintain their resolution when they're resized. When you resize something, let's say that you go from an original size to a smaller size, you are going to make that size smaller. If you don't save or don't retain the larger image size, you're stuck with the smaller size. There's no going back. You can't make it bigger, in theory. There are some algorithms that are able to sort of look at your image and sort of create new pixels, but it's not producing new pixels from any real content. It's just sort of guessing. So when I say that in theory you can size images up, you're still not going to get quite as good of a quality. If you take an image from the internet and it's small, you going in and resizing that up in Photoshop isn't going to result in the same quality as if you took the image, edited it in Photoshop, and output it to a smaller size later. But on top of that, their colors and details can also distort when those images are enlarged. And that just sort of reduces the number of ways that you can then use these images. It might look good on screen, it might look good digitally, but if you were to use that in print, you'd be able to see all those individual pixels, and that isn't a professional look. So we want to be a little bit careful about that. Another disadvantage to raster files is that they can produce some rather large file sizes. A raster file can include millions, even billions of pixels. And while this creates a highly detailed image, it can also increase the file size and the loading speeds for viewing those images or downloading them and uploading them. Another issue, and this one's kind of niche, but you can end up with some fabric printing issues. Although there are some solutions for that these days, the nature of pixels being square, in the sense that square pixels make up raster images, that square structure doesn't always translate very well to things like fabrics and clothing or some dye-sublimated print types. We'll get to that in another lecture. But for this reason, vector images are a little bit more common of a choice when creating things like t-shirts and fabric prints. Though, like I mentioned, there are some solutions that are coming out nowadays that can sort of mitigate this. I already alluded this a little bit, but vector images are more commonly used for things like illustrations and logos, because vectors are made up of essentially mathematical formulas that can scale up or down sort of infinitely. Really the limit to how big you can make a vector image is the size of the artboards that you're working with and the size of the capability of the printer. You can really make a vector drawing the size of a billboard. You can make it the size of a building for all that matters. But the reason that we're able to do this with something like a vector drawing and not with a raster drawing, or raster image, I should say, is because it's all just using math. And math is scalable. You can multiply math. You can't multiply pixels. And this means that compared to pixels or raster imaging, vectors don't lose their resolution when they're resized. Vector images actually don't use pixels at all. They're created with numerical expressions that define shapes, lines, curves, and it uses positions, or in other words, coordinates on a grid to define that shape. And because the grid can sort of be any physical size, you can sort of think about that as a grid for a street map of the city or town that you live in. You can think about a grid on your smartphone. If you're zooming in on a map on your smartphone, that's a grid. Or page in a guidebook or a printed wall, you can use grids there, and the shapes can then be made larger or smaller by changing the size of the grid or the numbers that define the points on that grid. Internally, a vector file is really just a list of instructions that tell a computer program where to place points on a grid and then how to join all of those points or connect all of those points. And essentially what colors those shapes ought to be. And when you see an image or an illustration that comes from a vector file, it's essentially been translated into pixels or dots if you're printing, pixels if you're using a screen, or pigment dots for print or to put onto a substrate such as paper. In other words, when you're looking at the output of a vector drawing, it has essentially been what's called rasterized. And a raster is a mosaic of tiny shapes, usually squares, pixels, and you can commonly see those expressed as number of horizontal and vertical points. For example, 1920 by 1080 is the raster of a full HD screen, although that's a little outdated now. We're kind of mostly using 4K or 2K screens. Some are even 8K. But often that is then called the resolution of the output. There's a fixed number of dots in a raster, so the only way that you can really make one of those bigger or smaller is by changing the size of the dots or the distance between them. This is why a tiny photograph looks pixelated when you enlarge it too much. But the important thing to keep in mind here is that the word resolution applies only to the raster representation of the information in a vector file. particularly. If your vector drawing is a perfect rectangle, its output will always be a perfect rectangle, whether it is on a postage stamp or as big as the side of a building. It's never going to get pixelated because it didn't have any pixels to begin with, only drawing instructions. That's it. Now, the vector format is important when you need high quality graphics that can easily resize to different scales. And since they're created using numerical instructions, vector files will never become fuzzy or pixelated, no matter how large or small you make them. Artists and designers creating digital illustrations and company logos often use vector illustrations or vector files if the graphic needs to be sized up or down or used in different contexts. From something as small as a business card to maybe a t-shirt or a poster, all the way up to something like a logo on the side of a building. A logo saved in a vector format can't lose resolution because it has no native resolution to begin with. The most common types of vector files are something like an Adobe Illustrator file, which is signified by a .ai end sort of file name, essentially. You get EPS files, or encapsulated PostScript files is what that stands for. PDFs get a little tricky. I'll get to that a little bit later, but they can house vector information. And PDF stands for Portable Document Format. Most of us are pretty familiar with that one. And then you can also use SVGs, which are scalable vector graphics. All of those can certainly house a vector drawing. All right, some of the advantages of vector files, or at least some of the major benefits that you can get from them, include just really infinite resolution. There's virtually no limit on how big you can make your vector image. In contrast, raster files only have a fixed number of dots. So you can, if you were to enlarge them too much, the dots would then become visible to the eye. And we say dots become visible to the eye because you'll end up with this sort of fuzzy or pixelated look to them. You also get much lighter file sizes by avoiding these individual blocks of tiny pixels, and a lot of them. Vector files tend to be much smaller than raster images, such as photos, which can feature lots of camera data. And the instructions to build a model airplane, let's say, take up a lot less space than the model airplane itself does, just to kind of paint you a little picture there. A vector file is essentially just a set of instructions, but it's able to show those instructions visually, essentially. Actually, coming back here for a second, you also get editability. You can sort of add shapes and text and colors and filters to a vector drawing, and those shapes are really simple to modify or resize. All you really do is move the points or scale it up that define that shape, and you can very easily go back and edit them over and over and over again without ever losing the quality of that drawing. Now, these are some of the major disadvantages that you get when using vector files. They are a lot less useful for more complex images. You cannot make a photograph a vector image per se. You could vectorize an image, but you're still going to be sort of trapped with how big those pixels were in the first place. So they're less useful for complex images. Some highly detailed digital images or illustrations may be better suited for the raster format, where their individual pixels can then be edited. Vector files are much more suitable for graphics than photographic images in most cases. You can also end up with some compatibility issues. You'll absolutely need a vector-based design program, something like Adobe Illustrator, to open and work on vector files. And editing vectors in a raster-based software, which you technically can do, and vice versa, can still just be a little bit difficult. So just be careful with that. Know that Illustrator and InDesign, in a way, are typically vector tools, vector products, whereas something like Photoshop and InDesign can sort of dance in that category too. Those tend to be raster-based editors, so just keep that in mind. I'll circle back to that in a bit. You can also end up with some conversion issues. It's generally much harder to convert a raster image to a vector just because that's not really how it works. Than the other way around. You can absolutely have a vector drawing output to a raster format. So again, I'm using some technical terms here, but most of this will make a lot more sense when we actually get into the tools and start using them. Raster and vector files are the two most popular formats used for visual content. They represent images in two very different ways, so there's a lot to consider when deciding which one to use. Some of the main differences include resolution. I've sort of mentioned that one already. And this is just one of the main differences between vector and raster. The resolution of a raster file is often deferred to in the term of DPI, dots per inch, or PPI, pixels per inch. If you were to zoom in or expand the size of a raster image, you will start to see those individual pixels. Sometimes you need to zoom all the way in, sometimes you need to only go a little bit away. Sometimes you can actually see it natively, kind of like I'm showing in this image here. For the one on the right, I've kind of enhanced the pixelation of that. They don't always need to be that pixelated, but I think you get the idea. One really big thing is that raster files can also display a much wider array called a gamut of colors. I'll get to that in a future lecture, which permits much greater ability for color editing and adjusting. And they show much finer light and shading than vector files are capable of. But their downside to that is that they lose image quality when they're resized. An easy way to tell if an image is raster or vector is to increase its size. If the image becomes blurred or pixelated, it's most likely a raster file. I even encourage you, just go to a photo that's on your phone and just zoom in. If you can see individual pixels, it's a raster file. With vector image files, resolution is not an issue. You can resize, rescale, and sort of reshape vectors infinitely without losing any image quality. Vector files are super popular for images that need to appear in a wide variety of sizes, like a logo that needs to fit on a business card and a billboard at the same time. Another big difference would be the uses. Digital photographs are raster files. End of story. Digital cameras automatically shoot and save photos as raster files, and the images that you see online are often raster files too. That's typically how that works. Raster files are also really commonly used for editing images, photos, and some graphics, depending on how you're building those graphics. Vector files work better for digital illustrations, particularly graphics like logos or illustrations, drawings, icons, things like that. And that's because the resolution of vectors remains the same when resized, making them suitable for a super wide variety of printed formats or digital formats. Some projects combine both raster and vector-based images. For example, a brochure, you may use vector graphics for things like your company logo and the typography that goes on there, but then you might throw in some raster-based photography. So those are some things to really think about and that's really what cross-media design is all about, is how do we take these different things and use them to create a final output of our design. Then you also have file sizes. Raster files are generally, if not just larger, much larger than vector files. Sometimes they can be 10 times, 100 times the size. They can contain millions, even billions of pixels and incredibly high levels of detail. Their large size can impact device storage, the space that you have on your device, and can subsequently then slow down the loading speeds of websites that you're loading online. So it's important that we're sizing images correctly for the internet. It can slow down your device if you have a lot of storage built up on your computer. However, you can also compress raster files for storage and web optimization to make sharing those files a lot easier. However, you almost always want to retain that larger, natively sized image somewhere, which still will obviously consume some space. Vector files are much more lightweight than raster files. They contain essentially just the mathematical formulas that determine how your design is being drawn. From there, you also should consider compatibility and conversion of those files. You can open raster files in many different apps and web browsers, which makes them easy to view, edit, share. Raster files are often much more client-friendly files. Vector files, on the other hand, aren't quite so accessible because many vector types, or vector file types, I should say, require specialized software to open and edit those files. And while vector files can present some challenges, it's possible to convert those vector files to raster images, and in some sort of limited situation, raster files to vector, although that's much more complex and very rare that we would ever need to do that. So be careful there. And lastly, file and extension types. Your software will usually determine your file type, whether it's raster or vector. There are multiple types and extensions of both raster and vector files, each with their own features, to be completely honest. There are far too many to actually list out, but some of the more common ones that you will find, and many of which you will use in this class, I've covered in another slide. Here are all of those file types. It's important that you know what these are, that these exist, what they do, and the specific use cases for each one, though you may never actually use all of these. You're going to use some of them, but you may never use all of these. Awesome. Adobe has become one of the most trusted names in software. I'm going to use the word trusted really carefully there, but for creative professions such as photographers, graphic designers, filmmakers, web designers, just to name a few, the Adobe Cloud, also referred to in shorthand as Adobe CC, is the most comprehensive creative software offering that we have to date. So it's important that you know what these tools are. The Adobe Creative Suite, also known as Adobe CC, or the Adobe Cloud, is a comprehensive collection of Adobe desktop software and mobile applications under really just one umbrella. Adobe CC is acquired and maintained through a monthly subscription service. There are more than 20 different fully realized programs included with Adobe CC, but the cool thing is that you guys, as ASU students, you guys get this software for free. Check out the syllabus. The instructions for that are in the syllabus. So we'll get there in a minute. The Adobe Cloud Suite also includes a few goodies that aren't necessarily fully fledged software applications, but they are there. We should know about them and what they do. Also included are the Adobe Font Library, which is an allotment of cloud storage space, the Adobe Portfolio program, though I don't encourage anyone to use that, and I typically instead encourage students to use something like Squarespace. It also has various collaboration tools, and you can also get a membership to Behance.net, which also, contrary to popular belief, is not a portfolio, it's a social media platform. So just keep that in mind. But that's really what you get with the Creative Cloud. And before we break down all of the applications individually, we should start with a quick overview. I'm going to be breaking down, bear with me, 23 programs. We won't use each of these in class. We will only be using these. We're really just focused on 3 Adobe products, along with doing some work in Figma, which I'll get to, and Photoshop is, I'll get there. They all have their uses. I encourage you to take what you learn in this class and use that to help you continue to learn some of the rest of these programs, particularly Lightroom, Photoshop, After Effects, Premiere Pro, and maybe InCopy. I think those might be helpful for you. Those are really the top level tools that a well-rounded designer should know their way around at the very least. But that's just way too much to learn in one class, as I'm sure you will probably see as we get a little bit deeper into the modules. There's a lot of different programs included in the Adobe Cloud, and it can be a lot to parse through. You will certainly find yourself using certain programs far more than others as a UX designer, you would probably end up using something more like Figma or maybe Adobe XD in combination with something like Photoshop and Illustrator. If you're a print designer, you're going to be using Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign daily. If you're a filmmaker, you're going to be using After Effects, Premiere Pro, just to name a few, right? As we're breaking down each application, we're going to cover how useful each digital toolbox is likely to be within your context. Premiere Pro is the industry standard for video editing used by everyone from YouTube creators to Hollywood editors. It's a non-linear editing system, which means that you can jump around your timeline, layer clips, add effects, and really just refine your cut without being locked into a specific sequence. If you're working in film, television, advertising, or content creation, Premiere Pro is the tool you will be expected to know. It integrates seamlessly with After Effects for motion graphics, Audition for sound design, and the rest of the Adobe ecosystem can also plug into this thing. The learning curve is, I would say, moderate once you understand the basics of timelines, cuts, and keyframes. You can start building more complex projects from there, just building onto your toolkit. While we won't be covering Premiere in this class, it's absolutely worth learning on your own, especially if you're interested in things like motion design, documentary work, or branded content. That is super helpful for animating logos. Well, not really animating logos, but kind of putting together your timeline for sizzle reels and promotional content. Premiere Rush is Adobe's streamlined mobile-first video editor designed for really quick social media content. It is a simplified version of Premiere Pro that works across your phone, tablet, and desktop with automatic syncing between each of those devices. And Rush is really great if you need to edit a video on the go or publish directly to Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok without opening a full production suite. It has basic color correction, audio tools, and motion graphics templates, but it's not really built for complex projects. If you're already comfortable with Premiere Pro, you probably won't need Rush. But if you're managing social content and need something faster and more portable, it's a solid option. After Effects is the go-to tool for motion graphics. You would also use this for animation, visual effects, things like that. If Premiere Pro is for cutting footage together, After Effects is about creating and animating elements from scratch. You can use this for title sequences, logo reveals, kinetic typography, particle effects, green screen compositing. I'm in one of those right now. And frankly, you can do even more with it. It's layer-based and works on a frame-by-frame timeline, which makes it really super powerful, but also a little bit more complex to learn than Premiere. After Effects is really essential if you're interested in motion design, graphics for broadcasting, or even just making explainer videos like this. It integrates tightly with Illustrator for vector animations and Premiere for finishing video projects. And while we won't dive into After Effects in this class, it is still a critical skill if you're moving into any kind of motion or animation work, even branding. There are tons of tutorials online, and once you understand keyframes and expressions, you can really create some truly impressive work within After Effects. This is actually one of my little passion projects that I'm trying to work on, is just getting a little bit better with time-based media. Photoshop is an absolutely essential program for really anyone, but mainly for photographers. It's really got widespread use among the graphics industry. Digital designers, photographers, even filmmakers use Photoshop. And this program is a true powerhouse for manipulating images, compositing elements together for an image poster. You can use it to retouch photos, create image-heavy applications. Most of us are pretty familiar with what Photoshop does. But Photoshop can also be used to design elements within art departments that get fabricated and placed within other designs or environments. That said, though, Photoshop is rarely a final output. It has some text tools and some color swatch options, but it is, by nature, a raster tool. So often we take PSD or Photoshop files or other image outputs like JPEGs, PNGs, or GIFs, and they become assets for layouts within tool like InDesign, or elements that we then use in Illustrator, or textures that we can throw into 3D programs or After Effects. And understanding Photoshop's strengths and limitations is really the key to knowing when to use it versus a vector tool like Illustrator. Adobe Acrobat is the professional standard for creating, editing, and managing PDF files. And it's going to be an essential tool in your workflow this semester. We're going to use it several times. PDFs are the universal file format for sharing designs. They preserve our fonts. They represent colors accurately. They're able to showcase entire layouts across any device or opening on really any operating system with zero issues. Which makes them critical for client handoffs. You can send them to a client and they are almost guaranteed to be able to open a PDF file. They work well for handing off files to printers. You can even, in some situations, make a portfolio that is visible as a PDF. So in this class, we're going to use Acrobat to combine multiple documents into a single file. And you can also use it for interactive elements like hyperlinks and bookmarks. You can use it to compress files for web sharing, and also to ensure that your work is print ready with proper bleeds and crop marks. And You also, in this class in particular, you will learn how to annotate and mark up a PDF for feedback. You can even use it for redacting sensitive information and add form fields or digital signatures when those things are needed. Acrobat is sometimes overlooked as a boring tool, but it's really one of the most important programs in a designer's toolkit. A poorly exported or improperly formatted PDF can ruin an otherwise great project. So really understanding how to control your PDF settings is not really negotiable, at least not in this industry. We'll spend some time learning how to create some high quality professional PDFs that represent your work the way that it sort of deserves to be seen. Bridge is an interesting one. It's Adobe's digital asset manager, and it's basically a souped up file browser designed to help you organize and preview creative files. It lets you batch rename and do things like add metadata, apply keywords, and preview files from across the Adobe ecosystem without opening each program individually. If you're managing hundreds or thousands of photos or design files or project assets all at once, which is not uncommon, Bridge can save you a significant amount of time. It's actually overlooked a lot. It's also handy for syncing files between team members or creating consistent naming conventions. That said, most designers don't use Bridge unless they're working with massive libraries of assets or need some really advanced organization tools. It's worth knowing that it exists, but it's maybe not going to be an essential for some of your day-to-day work. Lightroom is Adobe's cloud-based photo editing and organization tool. It's designed for photographers who shoot on their phone or want to edit across multiple devices. It's streamlined, mobile-friendly, and it syncs with your edits from your phone to your desktop automatically. Lightroom is good for some quick adjustments and color correction, exposure, cropping, applying presets, but it really doesn't have the advanced retouching or compositing tools that Photoshop or even Lightroom Classic offers. If you're managing a personal photo library or editing images for social media, Lightroom is fast and it's intuitive, it works, but for really serious design or photo editing work or professional retouching, you still need Photoshop or Lightroom Classic as well. Which brings us to Lightroom Classic. This is the desktop-focused version of Lightroom. It is the professional standard for managing and editing large photo libraries. Unlike the cloud-based Lightroom Classic, unlike the cloud-based version of Lightroom, Lightroom Classic stores everything locally on your computer or a hard drive, which gives you more control and much faster performance when working with hundreds or even thousands of images. It is built for photographers who need to organize, batch edit, color grade, and export photos really efficiently. Wedding photographers, editorial photographers, anyone managing a serious catalog of images. Lightroom Classic has some really powerful tools for non-destructive editing. That's really important, meaning that you can make adjustments without permanently altering the original file. It also integrates with Photoshop, so you can jump between programs when you need more advanced retouching. While we're not going to cover Lightroom Classic in this class, it is worth learning, especially if you're working with photography at some large scales or need some more robust organization tools than Photoshop offers. Audition is Adobe's digital audio workstation, and it's built for editing, mixing, and mastering sound. It is the go-to tool for podcast producers, video editors who need really clean audio, and sound designers working on film or motion graphics. those kind of projects, really. Audition has some really powerful noise reduction tools, multi-track mixing capabilities, and audio restoration features that can save some poorly recorded interviews or dialogue. It's still best to try to capture that audio in a more consolidated way if you can. Try to get it right in person. But Audition, if you're working in a video or motion design space, having some basic Audition skills it'll make you more versatile. Clean audio is really just as important as really good visuals. And that said, it is a very specialized tool, and most designers probably won't need it unless they're working heavily in video or audio-driven content. Media Encoder is a background encoding tool that converts video files into different formats. It sort of compresses them for web or social media and creates what are called proxy files for editing. It's designed to run while you keep working in other programs, which means that you can sort of queue up a bunch of exports and let them all process overnight. Because if you've ever worked with video files, rendering those videos out can be work. So being able to queue them up and have them process overnight allows you to work on them during the day. You can process them out, and all is well with the world. Media Encoder integrates with Premiere Pro and After Effects. It is essential if you're managing video workflows that require multiple output formats. It's not a flashy tool, but it's incredibly useful for anyone working with video or motion graphics, basically time-based media at scale. Mixamo is a web-based platform for rigging and animating 3D characters. I'll be honest, I didn't even know this existed before I started designing this lecture. As you can tell, it doesn't quite look much like any other Adobe platform. But if you upload a 3D model and Mixamo automatically rigs it, it does this with a skeleton. You can apply pre-made animations that do things like create walk cycles, jumps, or action sequences. It's really popular with game designers, motion graphics artists, and really anyone who needs quick character animation without hand animating every single movement. Mixamo is free and surprisingly powerful. I encourage you to play around with it. It's a niche tool, but unless you're really thinking about working in 3D or game design, you're probably not going to need this one. Adobe Camera Raw is a plugin that opens inside Photoshop and Bridge. It is designed for processing raw image files straight from a camera. Raw files are actually really quite neat. I use them a lot, particularly as a photographer, because they contain more data than things like JPEGs, which gives you more flexibility when adjusting things like exposure, color, and sharpness. Camera Raw is a quick way to make global adjustments before moving into Photoshop or more detailed retouching. You can do a lot of the same things that you can do, actually more things than you can even do in Camera Raw within Lightroom Classic. So I typically just use that or another tool that I'll cover in a little bit. But if you're working with photography, particularly raw photos, you're likely going to encounter Adobe Camera Raw at some point, but it's not essential for most design workflows. SpeedGrade was Adobe's standalone color grading program designed for professional colorists working on film and video. It had some advanced color correction tools and supported high-end workflows, but Adobe actually discontinued it and integrated most of the features from it into Premiere Pro's Lumetri color panel. If you come across old tutorials or workflows that mention SpeedGrade, just know that these features now live within Premiere Pro. Illustrator is a big one. This is the industry standard for vector design, and it's going to be one of your core tools that we're going to talk about this semester. Unlike Photoshop, which works with pixels, Illustrator works with those mathematical points and paths and anchor points, which just means that your design can scale infinitely without losing quality. This makes Illustrator sort of the essential tool for things like logo design, icon creation, typography, illustrations, packaging design, really anything that needs to be resized or printed at multiple different sizes. And in this class, you're going to learn how to use things like the pen tool to create precise shapes and custom letter forms. You'll work with layers and artboards to organize some complex projects. We're going to learn how to export files within Illustrator, and both for print and digital use. So that'll be cool. You also are going to learn how to use Illustrator's color tools, things like gradients, although you really shouldn't be using gradients a whole lot, and effects to create much more maybe polished designs, although those are some fringe tools that you really want to be reserved in using. Illustrator integrates very seamlessly with things like InDesign and Photoshop, so understanding how to move assets between some of these key programs is going to be important for you to learn. That's actually the whole point of this class. We're also going to cover best practices for organizing your files, naming layers, and keeping your workspace nice and clean. Because these habits will save you hours of frustration down the line. And also, we don't work alone. We often have a lot of collaborators within this space. So you need to be able to build files professionally so that others can sort of pick it up where you left off and take it the rest of the way. Illustrator does have a little bit of a learning curve, especially if you're new to vector tools, but once it clicks, you'll realize how much control and precision it actually gives you. This is the tool that I tend to use the most. You create brand identities, design systems, and really any visual work that needs to be really sharp and scalable and professional. That happens primarily within Illustrator. InDesign is the professional standard for page layout and sort of multi-page document design. And it's going to be another one of those core tools that we're going to cover in this class. And it's going to become part of your workflow this semester, so just be prepared for that. It is built for designing books and magazines and brochures, annual reports. You can even use it to build a print portfolio, which is kind of dead these days, but I think it's coming back. And really any project that involves some text-heavy layouts, particularly across multiple pages. InDesign really excels at managing typography with extreme precision. You'll learn how to set up paragraphs and character styles, how to control things like leading and kerning, which I'll go over in another lecture. We'll talk about creating proper hierarchies and how to handle long-form text in ways that Illustrator and Photoshop really aren't capable of doing. In this class, you're going to learn how to create master pages that establish consistent layouts across your document. We'll talk about using grids and guides to maintain a visual structure and place linked assets from things like Illustrator and Photoshop so that your files stay organized and really editable. You'll also learn how to set up print-ready files with proper bleeds, crop marks, color profiles, and how to create interactive PDFs with hyperlinks, bookmarks, and embedded media for things like digital digital PDFs. InDesign is really where all of your design works comes together. Logos from Illustrator, images from Photoshop, and typography that lay out systems. Ultimately, all of that is used to make your work feel more cohesive and professional. And we'll cover some of the best practices for organizing your files, managing things like links, which are essentially just other assets, and exporting files properly for both print and digital outputs. InDesign has a bit of a steep learning curve, I won't lie, especially when it comes to understanding things like paragraph styles and master pages. But once you grasp how the program thinks, you'll realize how much power and control it gives you over really, really, really complex layouts. This is the tool you will use to do things like design editorial spreads for things like magazines, multi-page design, books that needs to look polished and ready for print publication primarily. InCopy is really a companion tool to InDesign. It was designed specifically for writers and editors working on collaborative publishing projects. It lets copywriters design, or really it lets copywriters draft and edit text inside an InDesign layout without altering the design itself. Which is really, really useful in editorial workflows where designers and writers need to work simultaneously on the content within the same document. You can think about this as things like magazines or newspapers or corporate publications. Designers would work in InDesign while the writers would work in InCopy, and they can be working at the same time, and you can sync the changes between the two programs. Unless you are working in a really large publishing house or making some really large magazines or publication documents, maybe on something like an editorial team, you're probably not going to encounter InCopy a whole lot. It is a specialized tool for collaborative workflows between designers and copywriters, though. Not something most independent designers are going to need to know, or really UX designers either, but if you are going to be doing work for print, you should know what InCopy does. XD is interesting. It's sort of Adobe's competitor to Figma. And it's really just a UX UI design and prototyping tool built specifically for designing websites and mobile applications and digital interfaces. It lets you create wireframes, mockups, and interactive prototypes all within one program. And it has decent collaboration features for sharing designs with clients and developers. XD was popular for a little while, but Figma's more real-time collaboration and browser-based workflow really sort of won the battle here out of most of the design community, I should say. That said, though, XD is still used in some organizations, particularly government agencies and companies that require much more increased levels of security. And this is because XD is still desktop-based and doesn't rely on cloud storage. Therefore, it's easier to sort of lock down and control access, which makes it appealing for highly regulated industries like defense, healthcare, and finance. If you are comfortable in Figma, you're probably going to be able to pick this up pretty quickly. The interface and the workflow are similar, just know that Figma is the sort of current industry standard, so prioritize learning that first if you're not familiar with either of these. Dimension is a 3D design tool built for creating product mockups and photorealistic renderings. It is designed for designers who don't have deep 3D modeling skills but need to visualize things like packaging, branding, or product designs in 3 dimensions. You can import 3D models, apply graphics from Illustrator or Photoshop, adjust lighting and materials, and render some pretty high quality images for presentations or marketing, or even for product photos on a website. Dimension is actually really useful if you're working in branding or packaging design and need to show how your design looks wrapped in 3D space on something like a box or a bottle or other physical product. It's easier to learn than something like Cinema 4D or Blender, but it also is less powerful. It is a very niche tool, but if you work in product design or branding, it is absolutely worth exploring. I find it incredibly frustrating, but it is a good to have. Adobe Arrows is sort of Adobe's augmented reality tool, or augmented reality creation tool, I should say. It was designed for building interactive AR experiences without coding. You can take 2D designs or 3D models and place them in real-world environments using your phone or tablet. Arrow is really great for experiential marketing. Maybe even creating things like educational demos or product visualization. You can think about this as placing a virtual piece of furniture in someone's living room or creating an interactive museum exhibit. It's still a relatively new tool. I don't know a whole lot about this one. And AR is an emerging field, so Arrow isn't essential for most designers, but if you're interested in experimental design in any way or sort of 3D space, things like Vision Pro goggles or Meta goggles, if you're interested in any of that or immersive experiences, it is worth playing around in a little bit, kind of augmenting yourself with it. Dreamweaver is Adobe's web development tool, and it's been around for decades. It's been around since back when I was an undergrad, and longer. It is a visual editor that lets you design websites while also sending, or better yet, seeing the code while you're editing it, sort of the underlying HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Dreamweaver was really popular in the early days of web design, but most modern developers don't use it anymore. They much prefer code editors like VS Code, Sublime Text, or writing code essentially directly in the frameworks like React or Vue. That said, Dreamweaver is still useful for design students who want to learn some basic web development. It's good that UX and design students know some HTML and CSS, not because you're ever going to need to use it professionally, but so that you can develop empathy for your developers and really understand what's possible in a development workspace. Learning a little bit of code helps you speak their language and design with some of those technical constraints in mind. Most developers work in completely different languages, primarily things like Python, Ruby on Rails, or JavaScript frameworks, but learning HTML and CSS gives you a small peek into that world. A lot of job descriptions will say that you must know HTML and CSS. I've been working in this industry for upwards of 12 years. I've had roles in UX design. I have hired people in UX design. That is there because of exactly what I mentioned. They want to make sure that you can know how to communicate with the developer. You are rarely, if never, going to need to actually touch code as a UX designer. But it does give you a small peek into that world. And Dreamweaver makes learning that process a much more visual and less intimidating process, even if it's not the tool that professional developers are going to use. Animate is Adobe's vector animation tool. It was originally created as Flash before Adobe sort of rebranded and repackaged it. It is used for creating web animations, interactive content, and animated characters, particularly for output to HTML5. Animate is popular for creating things like banner ads, educational animations, some really simple character animations. It is also used in some game development workflows for 2D assets and UI elements. While it's a pretty capable tool, It's been largely overshadowed by After Effects for motion graphics and even modern web animation tools like Lottie and CSS animations really sort of outshine Adobe Animate. So you don't need to drop everything that you're doing as a UX designer or really any other kind of designer and go and learn this tool. I've never had to use it. Been in this industry for over 12 years. So unless you're working specifically in the interactive web content or 2D animation space, you probably won't need Animate. And even then, it's still kind of a fringe tool. So this one, probably you're never going to need to crack it. Adobe Character Animator is a modern capture tool that lets you animate characters in real time, use your webcam and microphone. It tracks your facial expression and voice, then applies them to an actual rigged character. If you created that character in something like Illustrator and Photoshop, it will actually use those assets and it will rig to that. It's actually really popular for live streaming. Things like explainer videos and broadcast graphics where you need a talking character without manually keyframing every single moment. Character Animator is actually a fun and surprisingly powerful but still somewhat niche tool. Unless you're creating animated content somewhat regularly and frequently, it's not essential to hardly anyone's workflow unless you're really in the animation space. And then Prelude. Prelude is a video ingest and logging tool designed for organizing footage before it moves into Premiere Pro. It is used by editors and assistant editors to import clips, add things like markers, creating what are called rough cuts, and then they can also tag that footage with metadata. And Prelude is helpful if you're managing a really massive amount of footage from a project like a documentary or a feature-length film or a narrative project, but it's really overkill for most design workflows. This is kind of like Bridge, but specifically for videos. And unless you're working on large-scale video productions, you're really never gonna need this. So just know it's there. All right, the moment we've all been waiting for, let's talk about Figma. I know a lot of you UX design students particularly might already be familiar with this tool and probably feel pretty comfortable in Figma. Perhaps more comfortable in Figma than you feel in Adobe applications. That's fine. But we need to have a really honest conversation about what Figma can and cannot do, because there's a tendency for students to want to use Figma for absolutely everything, and that's going to get you in trouble. So let's talk about what Figma is and where it came from, and most importantly, when you should and should not be using it. Figma is really just a suite of cloud-based design tools built specifically for digital product design and collaboration. The key word there is cloud-based. Unlike Adobe's desktop applications that you have to install on your computer, Figma runs entirely in your web browser. They do have an application, and I still strongly recommend that you download the Figma app because it does unlock a few additional tools and keyboard commands for you, but you can 100% use your web browser to create your designs in Figma. And this means that you can access your work from any device anywhere as long as you have internet. There's no software to install per se. I still recommend you download the app. Files save automatically and you get built-in version history, almost like a Google Doc. The original Figma suite had two main tools. It had Figma Design for UX, UI work and prototyping, and it had FigJam for collaborative whiteboarding. But that's expanded somewhat significantly in the last couple of years. We'll get into that. Let's talk about Figma and how Figma became the dominant tool for UX UI work today. Because back when I first started in this industry, we were still designing web pages in Photoshop. After that, I think we had Sketch and we had Adobe Muse for a little bit, which was helpful. It was actually quite cool. Then Adobe XD came along in 2016, and that was an absolute game changer for us. For those of us who were already embedded in working with Adobe softwares, it was a really nice segue into web design. It made web design really accessible for most of us. It had a few quirks that still linger today for some reason, like not being able to make bulleted or numbered lists. Don't know why that's a thing. That seems like a really easy fix. But for some of those same reasons, quietly in the background, Figma was founded in 2012 by Dylan Field and Evan Wallace. And officially, they launched Figma in 2016. So right about the same time that Adobe XD was coming out. Figma introduced something completely revolutionary for its time. That browser-based collaborative design environment where multiple people could work in the same file simultaneously. Even to this day, that is something Adobe has absolutely failed to deliver on, no matter how much we begged them for it. Between 2020 and 2022, Figma completely overtook Sketch and Adobe XD to become the industry standard for UX UI design. In September of 2022, Adobe obviously started recognizing this, and they submitted a formal bid to acquire Figma. And that bid was for $20 billion with a B dollars. That's billion with a B. However, in December of 2023, that deal fell through because the EU and the UK regulators blocked it over antitrust concerns. Basically, regulators were worried that if Adobe bought Figma, they'd eliminate all competition in the design tool market and they would have a monopoly, which is absolutely a valid concern. And I think we're all happy that Adobe wasn't able to do this because they have a very long history of simply acquiring softwares that attempt to compete with them, and rather than using that acquisition to improve their products, they simply kill the product and eliminate the competition. It's really quite frustrating. As part of the original acquisition agreement, though, Adobe had to pay Figma a $1 billion, again with a B, $1 billion in what's called a back-out breakup fee when the deal collapsed. Even though it was collapsed because of regulator concerns, Adobe still had to pay that. And this is what gets interesting for us. Figma then took that $1 billion and reinvested it into rapidly expanding their product suite. In just 1 year, between 2024 and 2025, they launched Figma Slides, Figma Make, and 2 tools that are currently in beta called Figma Buzz and Figma Sites. So Figma is absolutely moving way beyond just UI design into presentations, app building, communication, and even web publishing, which is really cool to democratize that space. I do envision a future where they hopefully expand into tools for print, but right now, that's not part of their product. Now, I do have a hypothesis. If Adobe doesn't figure out how to implement some sort of co-working, simultaneous collaboration into their products within the next, I'll say 5 to 7 years, I have a really strong feeling that they will collapse and give way to products that do prioritize collaboration. But that's just my hunch. So I'll leave that there. Figma Design is the core product. It is their browser-based UI UX design and prototyping tool. You'll use this for website design, wireframing, mobile app interfaces, interactive prototypes, user flows, design systems, component libraries, responsive design, digital product design. Really, you can do a lot with it. So I understand the desire to want to do everything in it. One of Figma's biggest advantages is that real-time collaborative design, meaning that multiple people can be working in the same file at the same time, which is huge, absolutely huge. It's a game changer for teams and working on team projects. If you're designing anything for screens, websites, apps, digital interfaces, even digital ads, Figma Design is usually the right tool for that job. FigJam is Figma's collaborative whiteboard tool, and it's essentially their answer to another software called Miro. You use it for brainstorming, ideation sessions, sitemap and user journey mapping. You can facilitate workshops in it. You can even wireframe out some rough concepts or conduct team retrospectives in them. You can organize your research and create sticky notes and diagrams and flowcharts. It's pretty powerful. You can think of FigJam as sort of the messy exploratory phase before you move into increasingly more high-fidelity design work in Figma Design. The nice thing is that FigJam integrates seamlessly with Figma Design, so you can brainstorm in FigJam and then copy and paste concepts directly into your design files. Figma Slides is their presentation design and delivery tool. You're actually looking at it right now. I use Figma Slides to design all my presentations, for the most part. You can use it for creating slide decks, design presentations, portfolio reviews, pitch decks, client presentations, educational content like I've done, collaborative presentations. You can even build your presentations collaboratively, which is quite cool. And you can embed live Figma prototypes directly into your slides. So that's another pro there. Big advantage here is that you're already probably working in Figma Design. You can pull your live design work directly into your presentation without having to export static images. It's pretty slick for design-heavy presentations. I use it all the time. Figma Make is essentially a no-code visual application builder that just released in 2025. The idea is that you can turn your Figma designs into actual functional web applications without writing code. You'd use it for rapid prototyping with real data and building simple web apps without coding, connecting your designs and data sources, creating some functional client demos, and then bridging the gap between design and development is really what that's there for. I think this represents where Figma is headed. They really want to truly democratize and change the way that websites and digital products are built, which I think is pretty cool. Figma Buzz is a communication and feedback platform currently in private beta. It's designed to centralize all communication around design work. It creates threaded conversations. You can put feedback in there. You can host asynchronous design reviews where people leave annotations, post project updates, get notifications, and organize really all your design feedback in one place instead of having it scattered all across different platforms like Slack and email and different comment threads. I'll be honest, I've used this, but I haven't used it, if you know what I mean. I personally think it's a little bit of a mute tool because we have a commenting and development feature built into Figma Design, but maybe there's something to it that I'm not fully aware of. So once it comes out in full, off the beta, I'll experiment with it a little bit more and see what it has to offer. But my understanding of it is that the goal is to reduce context switching between tools. You probably won't have access to this yet, maybe you do, since it's still in private beta. I have access to it as an educator. So if you want to check it out, let me know. Maybe we can figure out the hype together. But again, I think this shows Figma's strategy of trying to build an entire ecosystem of tools rather than just being a design app per se. Figma Sites is their web publishing tool that lets you turn Figma designs into actual live websites. You can use it for publishing designs as micro websites or even full-baked websites. It creates anything from simple landing pages and microsites to, again, full-blown apps, web pages, etc. You can make internal documentation slides with it. It has some basic but good enough CMS functionality as well, so there's options in there. It's also currently still in beta, and thinking like a student thinks for a moment, you might be thinking, oh great, I can build my portfolio on Figma Sites. I've already mentioned this one a bit, but just hold off on that for a little bit. I have a slide at the end of this section where I'll talk about it, but Figma Sites simply just isn't quite ready for prime time yet, especially not for something as important as your portfolio. Don't go designing your portfolio in it just yet. We'll talk about why in a bit. This is probably the most important slide in this entire section, so pay really close attention here. Figma is not a universal design tool. It is built for digital screen design. It is a digital publication tool, almost like how InDesign is a print publication tool. Here's where you should not be using Figma for absolutely everything. As much as I would also like to do that, number one, print design. You don't want to use Figma for print design because Figma only supports RGB color space, not CMYK, which is what print uses. I'll get to that in the next lecture. Also, there's no way to set up bleeds or crop marks, which are some of the more very important reasons why you wouldn't want to use this for print. You also can't properly configure print specifications, and it won't export print-ready PDFs properly. If you're designing something for print, use InDesign or Illustrator. That's that. I know it can feel difficult to learn another tool when you already feel proficient in one that will get you most, if not 90 to 99% of the way there. But it's very important in this industry in particular that you use the right tool for the job. Number two, resumes and documents. This is critical, especially if you hope to get a job in this industry, which I hope most of you do. Figma has a really nasty habit of scrambling the text when you export from Figma to a PDF. And that means that if you design your resume in Figma and export it to a PDF, applicant tracking systems, or the ATS softwares that companies use to scan those resumes, won't be able to read it. Your resume is going to get automatically rejected before any human ever even has an opportunity to look at it. It's just going to auto-reject it. And you will never, ever, ever get the job. No one's even going to know you exist. Use Google Docs or Word or InDesign if your resume needs to be designed. But Google Docs and Word should get you most of the way there. Never, ever, ever, ever Figma. And then number three, complex multi-page documents. We don't want to use Figma for that. Figma isn't built for 50-page reports or books. It doesn't have master pages or advanced typography controls or paragraph styles or automated tables or really a lot of the things that InDesign has. Use InDesign for things like magazines, books, annual reports, other really long multi-page documents. Even if it's like, and when I say really long, it could be 5 pages. Use it for that. And then number four, professional logo design. Figma does have vector capabilities, but where Figma goes a little bit wrong is with their export options, which are somewhat limited. Print vendors and sign companies often need AI or EPS files. And while Figma can export an EPS file, it adds some odd compression, and the math for Figma's vector drawings aren't quite the same as other vector design tools, which can cause some really strange artifacts to show up when opened in certain programs. Designing logos, icons, etc. Do all of that in Illustrator, just so that you have maximum just so that you have maximum compatibility with all of your vendors. You can still move logos and icons from Illustrator into Figma just fine. That is the correct workflow. All of that said, use Illustrator for those things. And then number 5, photo editing and retouching. Figma has some basic image adjustment tools, but they're pretty terrible. Don't use them, please, ever, at all. Essentially, all this feature is doing is trying to modify what is called a lossy image. I'll get to what that means in a little bit. And since that is the only file types that you are capable of uploading as images to Figma, you really shouldn't be editing a lossy image at all. I'll explain some of that in the next lecture. Figma also doesn't have any real image masking or spot healing or real color correction capabilities. So edit your photos in Photoshop first, then bring them into Figma for use in your designs. You also have to be really careful when exporting images from Figma to ensure that you're not trying to export a size that is larger than what that image can handle. But that gets a little bit more technical than I'm hoping to go for this lecture, so I'll leave that one there. Number 6, video or motion graphics. Figma prototypes can simulate motion and animation, but you can't export actual video files from Figma, at least not at this time. I'm telling you, I would love it if it could. There's a lot of use cases where I'm like, oh, I'd really love to be able to export a video or even just a GIF. Who knows what they have in store for us in the future. If you need to create video content or motion graphics, use After Effects or Premiere. Now, let's talk about what Figma actually excels at. Number 1, digital product design, obviously. Figma is built for designing websites, mobile apps, software interfaces, responsive design for various screen sizes and design systems that scale across digital products. From there, Figma is really good at real-time collaboration. Multiple designers can be working in the same file simultaneously, and you get instant feedback and commenting. And you can do live presentations and design reviews directly out of Figma. It's really a beautiful thing. I love it. And then from there, prototyping and user testing, you can create interactive prototypes that feel and work by and large like real apps. You can test the user flows before you even start development. You can run stakeholder demos and client presentations all within the app. It's amazing. Digital design systems and component libraries are great inside of Figma. You can build reusable component libraries, maintain consistency across large products, and make updates that cascade through all your designs automatically. That's really nice. And then you can also create cross-functional teamwork. Designers, developers, product managers can all work in the same file. Developers can even get specs and code snippets for handoff, and it really does help democratize some of the design decisions across the entire team. This is where Figma really shines. It's unbeatable for collaborative digital design work. But that's the key word, digital design work. Whether you are, really whatever comes out of Figma should have the intent to be used on digital devices and screens explicitly. I mentioned we would come back to this, so let's specifically address Figma sites for a moment. particularly for portfolios, because I know some of you are going to be tempted to use this. Right now, Figma Sites has 3 major limitations or problems, especially for use in portfolios. First, there are some really massive search engine optimization limitations. You have very limited, practically zero, control over the meta tags, page titles, and search optimization when using Figma Sites, which means that your portfolio might not show up when recruiters are searching for designers, primarily through Google. Second, there are some really serious performance issues. Sites can load extremely slowly, especially when compared to traditional web platforms. And there's no real advanced optimization options as of right now, so hopefully that's something they're looking at fixing. And then third, you have very limited customization. You are constrained by what Figma allows. You can't add custom code for unique interactions, and it's really difficult to integrate analytics or other third-party tools so you can be involved in your site's traffic data. So what should you use instead? My personal recommendation is Squarespace. It's affordable, it looks professional, and has really good SEO that works. And they offer great student discounts and really easy to use editor platforms. Webflow is also great, though it can be a little bit overkill. But if you want more control and don't mind a little bit of a steeper learning curve, actually quite a bit of a steeper learning curve, it's a good option. Wix or other WYSIWYG style editors are also really fine options. And then options that just aren't sufficient for portfolios are Behance, Dribbble, Instagram, Pinterest, etc. Those are great for showcasing work samples, and I encourage you to still upload work to them, but they're not a replacement for an actual portfolio website with your own domain and branding. These are effectively just social media sites, some with specific focus on design, but social media nonetheless. Figma Sites will probably get better over time, but right now it's not ready for something as important as your portfolio. Just trust me on that one. Some other tools we probably ought to talk about. We'll jump into those. Capture One Pro is really the gold standard for high-end commercial photography, particularly in fashion, product, and editorial work. It is a direct competitor to Lightroom, but with far superior tethering capabilities that allow you to shoot directly into the software while your client watches in real time. The raw processing engine is sharper and much more precise than Adobe's, and it can handle massive files from medium format cameras, things upwards of 100 to 150 megapixels and even higher than that. If you're working in a professional studio environment or need pixel perfect color accuracy, Capture One is the tool that most professionals are going to reach for. Autodesk or AutoCAD is a precision drafting and design program used primarily by architects, engineers, and packaging designers. If you need to create technical drawings or floor plans or packaging guidelines with really exact measurements, AutoCAD is the industry standard for that. It is built for accuracy and repetition, not necessarily creative exploration, unless maybe you're an architect. So you won't really see that in typical graphic design workflows. But if you're working in environmental design or exhibit design or anything that gets built or fabricated, you will likely encounter AutoCAD files at some point in your career, and those can be incorporated into Adobe workflows pretty well. GitHub is really kind of the backbone of modern web development and collaborative coding. It's a version control platform that tracks every change made to a project, which means that you can experiment and you can sort of break things and roll back to earlier versions without losing your work. And developers use it to collaborate on code, review each other's work, and ultimately deploy websites. If you are working with a developer or learning to code yourself, GitHub is an essential tool that you should probably spend a little bit of time to learn. Even designers benefit from understanding how it works, especially when handing off files or contributing to larger design systems. Canva is a web-based design tool that's pretty popular. It's really built around templates. It's extremely accessible for non-designers who need to create social media graphics or flyers or presentations pretty quickly. Canva is also, they offer scheduling tools for things like posting content directly to social platforms, which makes it really popular with small businesses and solopreneurs. That said, though, it's generally avoided by professional designers because the more template-heavy workflows limits the amount of creative control and really produces work that often looks generic or overly familiar. Oftentimes, because it's templated, those templates get used and reused by different people. So if you've been using Canva, now's the time where that stops. And as you move deeper into design, you'll need tools that give you full control over typography, layout, color, and file output. Canva's strength is speed and ease, but that comes at the cost of precision and originality. Professional design work requires you to make intentional decisions from scratch, not customize pre-made layouts. That's not professional design work. Sketch was the industry standard for UI UX design before Figma took over. It is a Mac-only vector design tool built specifically for screen design, and many studios even still use it for app and website mockups. Sketch is fast. It's sort of lightweight in terms of how much storage and file space it uses. And it has some really robust plugin ecosystems that we're still kind of waiting for some of them to move over to Figma. However, it does lack Figma's real-time collaboration features, which has caused a lot of teams to migrate. So if you're interviewing at a company that still uses Sketch, you're going to be able to pick it up pretty quickly. It shares a lot of DNA with Figma and Illustrator, but part of your job might be to move some of those files out of Sketch and into Figma. Just something to look out for. Procreate is sort of the go-to digital illustration app for iPad, and it's really become the cornerstone tool for a lot of illustrators and concept artists and designers who work with a stylus in particular. It feels pretty intuitive and natural in the way that it mimics traditional media like pencil, ink, and watercolor. And Procreate is really perfect for sketching ideas and creating custom features, custom textures. You can even do things like hand lettering in Procreate or build full-out illustrations in there. Many designers have actually started using it as both a sketchbook before moving vector graphics into something like Illustrator, or they even use it as sort of a replacement for Illustrator. That's not what we're going to be doing in this class. It is an affordable and powerful tool, and I encourage you to use it. It is beloved by the creative community, but in this class we're really going to be focusing on Illustrator. Blender is a free open source 3D creation suite that does everything. Modeling, sculpting, animation, rendering, visual effects, even more beyond that. It is incredibly powerful, and it has some legitimate competition. It is much better than some of the competition because things like Maya and 3ds Max are super, super, super expensive. Some of those are still considered to be the industry standard, particularly Maya. However, Blender is much more affordable, so if you're looking to dip your toe into 3D design, check that out. It's a cool tool. If you're interested in motion graphics, game design, product visualization, or architectural rendering, Blender is a really great piece of software to get started with. The learning curve, I will admit, is extremely steep, but the community is huge, and there are tutorials for this everywhere. Plus, it's free, which makes it accessible for students and freelancers. Cinema 4D is the industry standard for motion graphics and 3D design, particularly in advertising and broadcast media. It is known for being more designer-friendly than other 3D programs, with a much cleaner interface and tighter integrations with things like After Effects. So if you're ever seeing a really slick product animation, the abstract title sequence for a movie, or a 3D logo reveal, there's a pretty good chance that it was made in Cinema 4D. It is a powerful, fast, and really efficient tool built for designers who need to create really stunning visuals without getting lost in some of the more overly technical workflows. Webflow, I've mentioned this a little bit, is a visual web design tool that lets you build fully functional, responsive websites without writing code. It is part design tool, part CMS, part hosting platform. Designers actually really love it because it gives them a lot of control over layout, interactions, and animations while still generating some clean, production-ready HTML and CSS. If you want to design and launch a website yourself without relying on a developer, Webflow is one of the really nice options that are available. It's also becoming increasingly used by agencies and studios for client projects, so it's good to know what this can do. And then Affinity Pro is a one-time purchase alternative to Photoshop. Where Photoshop, you have to pay monthly subscription for the Creative Cloud. Affinity, you buy it once and it's yours. And it covers most of the same grounds: photo retouching, compositing, digital painting, raster image editing. It is fast, it's affordable, it doesn't require a subscription, which makes it appealing to freelancers and a lot of students. The interface is similar enough to Photoshop that you can probably switch between them without doing a whole lot of context switching. Similarly, you also have Affinity Designer, which is a vector design tool and is essentially a direct competitor to Adobe Illustrator. It's all the same in the sense that it is a one-time purchase platform. It handles logo design, illustration, typography, and icon creation with a very similar feature set, but really at a fraction of the cost. It's fast, pretty stable, doesn't require a subscription, which has made it really popular with a lot of independent designers, small studios, students. However, Affinity Designer hasn't really overtaken Illustrator in the professional world. Illustrator has decades of industry adoption. I don't foresee Illustrator going anywhere just yet until Adobe does something really stupid. Affinity does have a pretty large plugin ecosystem, which is kind of nice. Has pretty tight integration with the rest of the design space, particularly within Affinity. But most client files are going to come in an Illustrator format. And most job postings list Illustrator as a required skill. Affinity Designer is a great tool and very much worth knowing, but Illustrator is going to stay the industry standard, at least for right now. And then similarly to InDesign, you have Affinity Publisher, which is Affinity's page layout program, really designed to compete directly with Adobe InDesign. It builds books, magazines, brochures, multi-page documents, and it does a really solid job at much of that at a much lower price too. Like other Affinity tools, it's a one-time purchase, no subscription. It makes it really attractive for freelancers and students, but it hasn't replaced InDesign in the professional publishing world for the same reason that Affinity Design hasn't replaced illustrators. We also have DaVinci Resolve, which is a professional grade video editing and color grading program used on mostly major film and television productions. It's known for having some of the most powerful color correction tools in the industry. It also has a full-featured editor capable of handling everything from YouTube videos to feature-length films. The free version is really robust, which has made it quite popular with the indie film market. A lot of content creators use this, even students. If you're interested or even serious about making video work and want an alternative to Lumetri Color within Premiere Pro, DaVinci Resolve is absolutely worth taking some time to learn. And then Miro. Miro is actually another collaborative whiteboarding platform used for brainstorming, workshops, and remote work. It's great for mapping user journeys, running some design sprints, organizing research, and creating rough wireframes. A lot of companies and organizations actually use Miro for collaboration, so it's good to be familiar with. That said, if you're already working in Figma, FigJam is equivalent and, in my opinion, a better choice for your workflow. FigJam does essentially the same thing as Miro, but it lives inside of Figma. So it just means that you can move more seamlessly between whiteboarding and designing. Since most of you already will be in Figma for your design work, it just, in my opinion, it makes more sense to stay there. Still, know that Miro exists. You'll likely encounter it in a lot of professional settings. Notion is an all-in-one workspace tool that combines note-taking, project management, databases, and collaboration. Designers use this to organize research, manage design projects, write briefs, and build team wikis or how-tos. It is incredibly flexible. I call it a note-taking app on steroids. But you can create custom workflows, link documents together, embed almost anything into it. I actually build my courses in Notion first, and then I move them into Canvas. But beyond that, Notion's actually become really popular with creative teams because it's extremely visual, super intuitive, and it replaces the need for a lot of different tools. If you're managing a design project or need a central place to keep your process organized, Notion is a great place to do that. I use Notion every single day. If you ever get the chance to work with me in GIT 550, I actually teach how to use Notion for project and product management. It's a super fun class, and we actually get to work on a design team project together. So take a look at that. Consider adding that to your iPods. And then Adobe Express. This is Adobe's answer to Canva. It is a simplified, extremely template-heavy web-based design tool built for people who need to create content quickly, but don't necessarily have some of the design skills or maybe the time to learn the full Adobe Creative Suite. You can use it for very quick social media graphics, very simple marketing materials, video content for platforms like Instagram or TikTok, some basic animations and other templated design work. It is browser-based, it works on mobile devices, and it does integrate with the Creative Cloud, so you can pull in assets from your Adobe libraries, which is kind of nice. But here's the thing. Adobe Express serves a purpose. It is not a professional design tool in the same way that Illustrator or Photoshop are, at least. It is meant for speed and convenience, not precision or originality. The workflows are heavily templated, which means that your designs will inevitably look extremely similar to other people's work and will therefore lack the originality that companies often expect from their design teams. For this class and for your professional portfolio and the rest of your careers, you should not be relying on Adobe Express. If you need to make a quick social media post or a personal project, or you're helping out a friend with something simple, fine. I'm not here to judge you on that. But for any work that you are turning in or showcasing professionally, use the full Adobe applications. Adobe Express is essentially to Photoshop and Illustrator what Canva is to professional design tools. It's a shortcut that ultimately sacrifices control and quality for speed. Know it exists, understand what it's for, but don't make it your primary workhorse. All right, I am 100% aware that I just threw a lot of information at you. We talked about vector versus raster file. We talked about different programs within the Adobe software. That's a lot. That is a lot, I promise. You might be feeling a little bit overwhelmed right now. Here's the good news. You don't need to master all of that this semester. While I would still encourage you to find the time to learn as many programs as you possibly can, you have to focus on what actually matters within a given time. So let's focus on what actually matters for this class. I want to be very upfront and honest with you all. This class is going to be intense. It's probably going to be one of the more intense classes that you're going to have at ASU for your entire graduate journey. But I think that's a good thing. Your grad program is not going to be like undergrad. It should challenge you. It should challenge you to sort of question, what am I doing? How can I do that a little bit better? How can I push myself a little bit harder? How can I do that better, right? So this class is going to be a little intense. I won't sugarcoat that. I like to say that this class is a little bit like taking 4 years of undergrad design education compressed into one semester. And that is a lot. So we have to be a little bit realistic about the scope here. You are not going to be learning 30 plus applications this semester. I guarantee that. Instead, we're just going to focus on learning 4, maybe 5-ish of the essential tools really, really well. Here are the 5 tools that we're going to be focusing on. Number 1, Adobe Illustrator for vector design, logo, and icon creation and illustrations. We'll use Adobe InDesign for multi-page books, particularly a magazine and other printed documents. Number 3, we're definitely going to be using Adobe Acrobat. Most of us are probably going to be already familiar with that. There's not a whole lot of learning to do there, but we're going to use that for creating and not really editing, but perhaps compiling is a better word, and then ultimately annotating PDFs. And then number 4, obviously, Figma. That's probably the one that most of you are excited to learn. We'll use that for UI and UX design, digital product design, and prototyping. And number 5, sort of, is Photoshop. Here's the thing. We'll get to what the sort of means in a minute. But everything else we've discussed today is really important context. But these 4, really 4.5, are what you're going to be mastering in this class this semester. So let's break down what you'll actually learn in each tool. In Illustrator, you're going to learn vector design fundamentals, how to use the pen tool and shape tools, working with layers and artboards, color management, and swatches, exporting for both print and digital. We're going to be covering all of that. Illustrator is your tool for anything that needs to scale infinitely without losing quality. In other words, it is your vector graphics, logos, icons, illustrations, vector graphics. It is an essential tool that every single designer needs in their tool belt. This is a lot like your hammer if you are a construction person, and you'll be using this a lot every single semester. In design, you're going to learn multi-page document layout. We'll talk about master pages, page numbering, paragraph and character styles, working with grids and guides, placing and linking assets, primarily assets from Illustrator and Photoshop, and then creating print-ready PDFs. InDesign is where all of your design work comes together into something that is polished, professional. Anything that is multiple pages should really be going out through Photoshop, or excuse me, through InDesign. We're particularly going to be making a magazine in this class, so get ready for that. This is a tool that takes your individual design pieces or your assets and turns them into more cohesive publications. And then Acrobat, I've already touched on this a little bit, but we're going to create some high quality PDFs from InDesign and Illustrator primarily. And then we'll take some time to be able to leave and resolve comments within PDFs, combine multiple documents into one PDF, and do some basic PDF editing and optimization. Now, most of you already know how to open a PDF and look at it. That shouldn't be new or novel, I hope. But professional PDF management is a slightly different skill. So you need to know how to export PDFs with the right settings, how to collaborate using comments, and use or manage PDFs for client deliverables. That's mainly what we're going to cover in Acrobat. Somewhat indirectly, as we go through most of the other softwares in the class, we're going to be using this in tandem with those. Figma, you'll learn UI UX design, primarily the fundamentals. There's a lot in here. You could take 4 years of classes learning nothing but Figma, and you would still probably not know the whole thing, just like with other applications. But we're going to cover a lot of the fundamentals, just creating responsive web designs, building component libraries, prototyping with sitemaps and user flows and collaboration, co-working and commenting. Figma is the industry standard for digital product design. If you're designing for screens, websites, apps, interfaces, you must know Figma. Many of you already are familiar with it from maybe other programs, which is great. However, some of you might be dipping your toe into this for the first time. That is all good here. We're going to make sure that you really understand how to use it professionally. Same goes for all the other tools we'll be covering in this class. Now, here's the deal with Photoshop. I said we'd circle back to this one. We're not going to be formally teaching Photoshop in this class, but you'll probably end up needing it. There are a few things that I want you to aim to learn on your own. Things like removing backgrounds from product photos, saving different file types like PSDs, JPEGs, and PNGs, making some minor edits like removing dust, spots, and scratches, basic photo adjustments like brightness, contrast, and color, and resizing and cropping images. Those are relatively straightforward skills that you can pick up as you need them. And there are tons of resources that are available to help you learn Photoshop. So why am I not teaching this to you? Really, there's 3 reasons for that. Number 1, employers are going to expect you to be able to find the answers on your own, or at least seek the training that you need when you need it. This is really a professional skill in itself called continuous learning. This is a skill that must be self-developed. You have to want to learn. You can't be taught to want to learn, as much as I would love to be able to do that for you. Number 2, there are tons and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of online resources for Photoshop. YouTube, LinkedIn Learning, Adobe's own tutorials. Photoshop is literally one of the most documented tools in existence. I promise you, the answer to whatever you want to do is out there. Perhaps several different answers. I often tell my students that if you can't show me how to do the same thing 10 different ways in Photoshop, then you're not a professional yet. And then number 3, most of what you'll need is pretty straightforward. Removing a background, saving a PNG, fixing a small spot, those are skills you pick up as you need them. Now, obviously, if you get stuck, absolutely ask me, or the professor teaching your class. Or, better yet, ask your peers. Your peers in this class are so stinking smart. Someone in the room is going to have the answer, but ask for help. But I want you to practice hunting for answers first. If and when you ask for help, I'll expect you to be able to tell me what solutions you've already tried. That's how professional designers work. It is okay to Google things, I promise. Even after you've already learned it, no one expects you to retain all of the information in a technical field like design. But you are expected to know where and how to find the answers. So here's what I'm asking you to do. In class, I want you to work on mastering Illustrator, InDesign, Acrobat, and Figma. On your own, remember there's no book assigned to this class, so you can treat this almost like your readings. I want you to learn some basic Photoshop skills as you need them. Additionally, I just want you to be aware of all the other platforms that we discussed today. Other tools, types that you may not end up using in class or ever. Just know what those are and maybe even some of the basic practices of how they connect with some of the tools that we are using in the class. You don't need to master all of that right now, but you should know it exists and understand the concepts. Importantly, I want you to know that all of this is manageable. You can do this. I believe in you. Trust the process. By the end of this semester, you're going to have real professional design skills. So let's get started working towards that. And this is why all of this is important. No matter the role you are ultimately hoping to obtain when you are done with this program, you must know how the larger engine works. You likely won't be the sole person working on a design team, but if you are able to better understand how other people's roles in the team contribute to the larger deliverable, and you're able to have an educated conversation with them, you will, in turn, become a better collaborator to them. All right, let's talk about software installation and setup for a little bit. I'm going to walk you through a couple of things within really the software Creative Cloud, which they've made it a little bit funky for downloading. So I'm just going to walk you through it. Mine's probably going to look a little bit different than yours because I've already installed all of my tools, but I just want to give you a little bit of a lay of the land and what you might be looking for. So let's get started with that. All right, quick walkthrough coming into Creative Cloud. Now, I work on a Mac, so if you're on a PC, I apologize. As much as I would love to be running both systems and be able to show you in both systems, most of the things that I'm going to talk about are going to be Mac-based. However, I do try my damn best when I'm talking about keyboard commands to make sure to convert them both in Mac and PC. Really, the things that you should know there are, if I ever say the word command, for PC, you can swap that with control. If I ever say the word option for PC, you can swap that with alt. Really, everything other than that should be relatively the same, maybe with few exceptions. That said, I do want to show you where you can go. If you are on any device, you can go to the syllabus, and again, Adobe Creative Cloud is free for ASU students. Once you get access to that, sometimes it can take about 24 hours, but once you get access to that, you can download it, and then you should end up getting an icon for Mac users. It should show up at the top there. And this will be where you can access all of your applications. You can even go over to this apps window over here. As you can see, I have a lot of applications already installed on my computer. However, if you don't have one installed, it's going to look something like this. You will just hit that install button for the applications that I've mentioned in the lecture. I also have them listed out in the syllabus. And you are welcome to install any of the other programs that you feel like you would like to spend a little bit of time learning. That's up to you. I would be a little bit careful with that, particularly if you are a little tight on RAM. And what I mean by that is your computer comes with some baked in internal memory. RAM memory is different than like storage memory. Your storage, ideally you want to have somewhere between like 128 gigabytes, ideally some more, especially in a design role. A good spot to be in is like 500 gigabytes to even a terabyte would be nice. That way you actually have some storage on your device to be working, and you're not going to run into scratch disk issues. And by scratch disks, your scratch disks are the element within your computer that your computer uses to run programs. And if your storage on your computer is full, there's not enough space for that program to run. I'll talk about this in the next lecture a little bit, but you want to make sure that you're saving a lot of your, really all of your work off your computer. You should consider getting something like one of these bad boys. These are external hard drives, or better yet, consider getting some cloud storage. I'll talk about that in the next lecture, so bear with me on that. Once you have all of these installed, they can take a minute. Do also download the Figma app. What I mean by that is go to Figma Downloads. It's figma.com/downloads, and download for your correct operating system. That said, be careful when you are signing up for this platform. Don't use Adobe free, or excuse me, Figma free. There is a difference, and you can actually see the difference when you go to the pricing option. There is a free option for Figma, but it is different than the free version that you get as a student. As a student, you get the professional version, which gives you a lot more features that you are going to need in this class. So in order to get there, you have to scroll down just a little bit to the Figma is free for students and educators. Click that, get verified. It's going to ask you some questions. So mine is going to look a little bit different because I'm already registered, but it might end up asking you a couple of questions like uploading your syllabus or to upload your bill for tuition, something like that. It's a little different for every person, but do that. Don't just sign up for the free version. It's not going to be sufficient for what we have to do in this class. So start with that. And other than that, that should really be it. So download Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, and Acrobat, as well as Figma. And then as far as Adobe application goes, or any of the other platforms that I already mentioned in this lecture, do go through and consider adding any of those that you want to spend a little bit of time investing in. There's a lot of resources, particularly LinkedIn Learning, where you can learn a lot about each individual software. From there, YouTube is a great resource. Find a content creator that you like. Even sometimes TikTok and Instagram Reels can be really helpful for some really niche little things. I have a little saved folder on my Instagram and TikTok with weird little things that I'm like, oh, that's an awfully specific thing that I'll need to know when that time comes around. So that's really it when it comes to softwares. If you have any questions, leverage your peers as well as myself. I'm happy to answer questions, but remember, I'm going to ask you what you've already tried in order to try to figure it out. But have a wonderful day. That's it for the first lecture here, and we'll get into the second one soon.